Hello everyone, welcome to the Diplomacy course. We will continue with Chapter 7, Diplomacy Practices of Global Powers. In this chapter, we will firstly talk about theoretical analysis of global powers diplomacy, then diplomacy of the United States, diplomacy of the European Union, diplomacy of China, and lastly, diplomacy of Russia. Let's start with theoretical analysis of global powers diplomacy. Analyzing foreign policy behaviors of states requires an in-depth examination of the motivations that influence state leaders in their external actions. Whereas one group of scholars argues that foreign policy behaviors are mainly a function of intangible factors of material power capabilities, geographical locations, and external developments, another group contends that intangible factors of personality traits, belief systems, worldviews, ideologies, and cultures play more decisive roles. Many middle and small-sized powers are much more preoccupied with their survival. Compared to global powers, their room of maneuvering is limited. On the other hand, global powers are in a much better position than middle and small-sized powers to ground their foreign policies on the basis of both tangible interests and intangible values. Unlike some middle powers and many small-sized powers, global powers have the luxury of helping bring into existence a particular external environment to their liking, as well as making use of existing power balances within the system to maximize their material power capabilities. Stated somewhat differently, global powers do not only aim at maximizing their power capabilities at the expense of their rivals, but also endeavor to midwife a particular external environment that affects their values and norms. Let's talk about the diplomacy of the United States. At its foundation, the United States proved to be different from traditional powers in Europe and other continents. The immigrant nature of the American society led the founders of the Republic to build their country on the basis of liberal, democratic, and pluralist norms, further enshrining the principles of individual freedom, free entrepreneurship, limited government, and checks and balances in the Constitution. In the realm of diplomacy and foreign policy, the rulers of the country long shunned the practices of getting involved in other states' internal affairs and becoming part of geopolitical competitions in other continents. The geographical location of the country, being walled from other places through two oceans to the east and west, enabled the early generations to focus their attention solely on economic development and political cohesion at home. Both state and non-state actors are quite influential in the U.S. foreign policy-making process. Compared to their Chinese and Russian counterparts, American presidents are weaker in the sense that they need to share authority with the U.S. Congress. The president is in charge of the execution of foreign policy and acts as the commander-in-chief during peace and war times. Let's move on to the diplomacy of the European Union. The EU is by far the most successful example of international institutions aiming at transcending traditional modern interstate relations through the formation of collective identities and supranational institutions. What seems to set the EU apart from other polities is that the postmodern logic underpinning its integration process has mainly culminated in the formation of a security community among its members, as well as the prioritization of multiple interdependencies and soft power instruments in its relations with external actors. The contribution of the EU to international peace and cooperation mainly stems from its success in institutionalizing the postmodern logic in interstate relations that increasingly cast doubts on the legitimacy of self-other dichotomies. The EU does not speak with one voice in the realm of foreign policy. On foreign policy, security, and defense issues, member states still preserve the right to veto any decision they think is not in their national interests. Recent years have witnessed the rise of illiberal, populist, anti-integrationist, anti-immigrant, and anti-globalist parties across the European continent. The number of Europeans who feel disappointed by the EU's performance and think that solutions to their problems should be sought after at domestic levels has climbed up. As of today, it would not be wrong to argue that the EU suffers from a legitimacy crisis in the eyes of its people. Our next topic is the diplomacy of China. As the dynamics of global politics have been going through transformative changes in recent years, the prestigious position of the Western actors within the current international order has become exposed to serious challenges. However, China now seems to be the country that has the most potential to help restructure the dynamics of the liberal world order in the years to come. The financial crisis that hit Western economies in 2008 severely seems to have turned all such Western assumptions upside down. China has now become the number one trading partner of not only its neighbors to the south and east, but also many developed countries in the West. This suggests that these countries would do well to pay significant attention to their access to Chinese markets, as well as their ability to borrow from China. China's foreign policy is made by the Chinese Communist Party organs, many of which are cleared by the President of State. The head of the state is also the Secretary General of the party and Commander-in-Chief of the People's Liberation Army. All state bureaucracy dealing with foreign policy is structured in a hierarchic and centralized way. Our last topic is the diplomacy of Russia. Since President Putin came to power in late 1990s, Russia has witnessed a national revival. Having an imperial legacy in the background and acting as one of the two superpowers of the Cold War era, it is quite natural and understandable that Russia wants to leave the troubled years of the 1990s behind and put a serious claim to global power status in the emerging century. Putin's Russia has been extremely aghast at the primacy of Western actors in world politics and therefore has been striving to help bring into existence a multipolar world order in which Russia plays a decisive role. Russian foreign policy is most of the time made by the president in consultation with particular state institutions that are supposed to aid the president in this process. Russia is an extremely centralized and authoritarian state, suggesting that foreign policy is mainly the business of the state. So, this is the end of our program for Chapter 7 of the Diplomacy course. Goodbye and see you in our next program, Chapter 8.